And I call Dawn Butler, who will speak for around 15 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for this debate. I'd like to talk around three issues. One, why I'm campaigning for safer streets and why gambling-related harm is a key component of my work. Two, some of the people and their testimonies. And three, the good work the government has done, but the more that needs to be done next. So in Brent, I was tired of seeing the number of betting shops on the high street. And every time there was an empty shop, another betting shop would be in its place. And this was specifically in areas like Harlesden, Wealdstone, Neasden, Wembley and Kilburn. And in Harlesden, we've got 10 betting shops within a 10-minute walk. That's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely give way to the chair.
I'm grateful for giving way. I first of all apologise because I won't be able to stay here for this debate because I have to follow up with the family that I was referencing who were in the gallery earlier on there, Brian Cornelius. But I do say that we have taken very seriously, as she knows, at the All-Party Parliamentary Group, the lessons of Brent, and they have been named in letters now to the government. We have to stop this ridiculous proliferation of betting shops and adult gaming centres with no control by councils who don't think it's the right thing to have these things there, yet they have no say in it. That should be the number one prime thing for government is, let's end that nonsense and give councils the power to say no.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and he chairs the APPG group on gambling harms, of which I'm a member, and thank you very much for that. Brent is a solid example of why this change is needed. And there's another shop that's due to be opened. It's a double-fronted gambling shop, and it's been graffitied with and I call it conscious graffiti. He says, stop opening gambling shops in deprived areas. So even those people, and so I endorse that message. And in Kilburn, there's been 300 written objections to a new proposed adult gaming centre. And when I campaigned on this, Brent Council said their hands were tied, and they said I needed to give more evidence. So I collated more evidence, thousands of responses from my constituents, but that still wasn't enough because of the aim to permit legislation. And this has actually led Brent Council, I know through my campaigning and probably nagging, it's led them to run an incredible campaign, and they've now got other councils on board, and the Deputy Leader from Brent is here today for this debate. And so in 2025, last year, my summer campaign, I decided to travel around the country, but mainly London, to investigate high streets and what they look like. And would you believe it, in economically deprived areas, there were plenty of brightly lit gambling shops just within 2 or 3 shops away. And so you could just look down the road and you'll see all these bright lights glittering, trying to encourage people to come in and spend their money. But there was one particular high street where I couldn't find a gambling shop, and I walked up and down on both sides, and it's one of the wealthiest high streets in London, and it was in Hampstead. And actually, it's shocking. And actually, one of the residents quite happily said to me, we even campaigned to stop McDonald's opening on our high street. We didn't want them. And on Monday, I produced a letter and published this letter, open letter to the Prime Minister, and it had 280 signatures on that letter, mainly from London, but all around the country, of councillors, leaders, mayors, all saying that this aim to permit needs to change. In Brent, 17 out of 22 wards have gambling premises that outnumber supermarket stores. And the thing is, what the gambling industry was saying was that they help high streets. They don't help high streets, because what happens when we have a gambling shop set up, other shops don't want to be there, because these gambling establishments, they entice people to come in and they ply them with food and drink and teas and coffees. So there's no point in having a coffee shop open next door when they're going to get free coffees in the gambling shop. Absolutely.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way and for her visit to Kensington and Bayswater, where she herself enticed me into an adult gaming centre to show me how it's set up to keep people there, and even that a machine can be reserved and people can go away and come back because they are preying on that kind of addictive mentality, and these are not places like the slot machines or the 20p arcades on the seaside towns. They're serious money.
Absolutely. Thank my honourable friend, and I hope it wasn't a bad influence that I enticed you in, but it was the first time that I had gone into one, that actually you have to go into one to really understand just what it is like. And as you said, we went in and they had a reserve on a machine for the person that went somewhere and to come back. I mean, I think the model, this business model, is extreme and it is rather cruel. Absolutely.
I thank her for giving way. She's delivering an excellent speech, and I really support her campaign to end this aim to permit. And another issue I've heard lots of people concerned about is the 80-20 rule, where gambling shops are required to have only 20% of their machines, the higher stake, more dangerous, more addictive machines. And there is a rumour or a consultation out that this might be liberalised. Does she agree with me that the liberalisation of this rule at a time when gambling regulation is not fit for purpose would be completely unacceptable?
Thank my honourable friend, that rule must not be changed. And I tell you for why. Because how these gambling shops get around it is they have these iPads, which they are classified as the lower-end machines, so the B2, B2, they don't work. And so that's how they get away with saying, well, that's why we've got more B3 machines, which are the most addictive machines, where you can put £20 in and you can lose that in a minute. And so that's why that rule shouldn't be liberalised at all. It's the way they work around it. As I say, their business model is absolutely quite shocking. The national average for low-risk gamblers is 13.4%, and high-risk gamblers is 2.9%. In Brent, we have 17.1% low-risk gamblers and 6.2% high-risk gamblers. So that shows the link between the proliferation of gambling shops and harm. And the thing that you do find on high streets when you have lots of gambling shops is pawn shops, because people lose their money and then they pawn what they can to try and gamble some more to win it back. Now, I'm not saying ban gambling altogether, but I'm saying we have to be honest about the harm that is being caused at the moment. And the 2005 Gambling Act is completely out of date. And this campaign, this latest iteration of this campaign has been a personal journey for me, and my understanding of the gambling harms. And like my honourable friend, where we went into his gambling shops, and he's running an excellent campaign to stop a huge gambling shop opening in his constituency, I've met some amazing people. And I want to just talk about the testimonies of these amazing people that I have met. And I've interviewed 2 of them, and those interviews are on my Substack. And their testimonies opened my eyes, and I hope anyone that listens to it would open their eyes. And it also moved me to tears. Jackie Alden, she's a phenomenal campaigner, Madam Deputy Speaker. Her mum, Wendy Hughes, worked in a bookmakers, where she was given free plays to play the machine so that she can entice the punters that were there. The bright lights, the sounds of the sounds of the noise and the music when they win. And she became addicted. So she started gambling with her own money. And towards the end of her life, she gambled on a slot machine for 16 hours straight. 16 hours straight. With the staff buying her food, so she didn't leave. They knew how she liked her tea and her coffee, and they kept her there because her credit card, she maxed out her credit card, so they kept her there over 12 hours so that her credit card limit would be renewed so she could take money out and start gambling again. They knew her favourite chair, they knew her favourite machine, and they let her gamble for 16 hours. She lost almost £2,000 in that session, and Mercer were fined £95,000 as a result of social responsibility failings. None of that money, I might add, went to the family. And Wendy later died of cancer, and she told her, I'm getting emotional, sorry, because Jackie's she's an amazing campaigner. So Wendy later died of cancer, and she told her daughter Jackie that she was gambling so that she could win enough money to pay for her funeral. And the people in that gambling shop knew that she was dying of cancer because they saw her emancipated body as she was, kept going in to gamble. And there's Charles and Liz Ritchie. They lost their son, Jack Ritchie, at the tender age of 24. He had a gambling addiction, and in Jack's suicide note, he said he would never be free from gambling, and that's why he took his life. And when I spoke to Giles, he told me how Jack got addicted at school. He was placing bets with his dinner money, and him and his friends would go into these gambling shops. And okay, it has been strengthened, and there are checks now for young people that look under 18, but there wasn't then. And he was going into these gambling shops with his friends, and he spent his gambling money, he spent his dinner money, and he had 2 big wins. He won £1,000, and he was addicted because he was chasing that win time and time again. And his parents didn't find this out until after he died. And in their grief, they decided to mobilise others. And Charles and Liz have set up an amazing charity called Gambling with Lives. And there are so many people who have been fighting this, and they've been fighting this on their own. And the Labour government has done some good work. There was just one NHS centre when Jack died. Now there's 15. But there's so much more that we must do. Absolutely.
Woman for giving way. She's making a really powerful speech. We had some representatives of the gambling industry in front of the Treasury Committee recently, and I think what it revealed to me was that these stories that the Honourable Member are sharing with us today, they are not tragic byproducts of an industry that's otherwise okay. They're actually part of the business strategy of that industry. They receive 60% of their profits from 5% of their customers. They need people like this in the circumstance they're in order to make the profits that they survive on. And does she agree with me that it was disgrace when those representatives in front of the Treasury Committee said there is no evidence of social harm related to gambling?
I not only do I agree with you, I find it shocking that they can blatantly ignore the evidence and lie like that. And you do wonder sometimes how people sleep at night knowing the harm that is caused. And we're not saying, scrap all gambling. What we're saying is we have to recognise, understand these harms, and we have to do what we can to prevent and stop these harms. And Gambling with Lives have helped influence NHS centres, but also the NICE guidelines too. And that is really vital and important to how we identify and link those harms to the increase in mental health and suicides. At the moment, we have on average 1 suicide a day due to gambling harms. And what we now need as part of the NICE guidelines, I will come to that actually a bit later, so I won't come to that now. But I've also met Rob Davis, the report from The Guardian, who was actually the first person to take me into an adult gaming centre and show me the ropes. But the ropes, Madam Deputy Speaker, is basically you stick your money in the machine and you press the button. There's no skill to it at all. And actually, you can even put it on autoplay, so you don't have to keep pressing the button, and it spins at 0.25 seconds, and that's why you can lose £20 very, very quickly. And then the veterans, in part of the APPG group, the veterans came and gave evidence. And this actually shocked me because I hadn't realised just how prolific gambling was from our veterans and in the army. And in the armed forces. But if we think about it, because of the business model that the gambling industry has, this is an ideal clientele for them because they have occupational stress and trauma, long deployments and separation from their support networks, cultural acceptance of gambling as a social activity, easy access to gambling opportunities. There's even addictive be-free machines in army barracks, and we don't know how many there are. We're still trying to get those numbers. So this is shocking, really, that this happens because despite the obvious risks of gambling that we're talking about, there's also an additional risk for people in the army because those people in the armed forces at an organisational level, They have an additional gambling-related harm because it can reduce operational readiness, it can leave personnel distracted, vulnerable to bribery or criminal influence, and less able to focus on their duties, increasing the risk of errors that may endanger themselves and colleagues and operational outcomes. So therefore, we have to tackle the gambling in the armed forces if we're going to make sure that they're able to do their job properly, and we also have to protect veterans. I've also spoken to Tom Fleming, Lord Foster of Bath, Harj Ghali, and Tom Goodsmith and Adam Brickell, who are making an important documentary on gambling harms. So, to end my speech, what is gambling harms and what can the government do about it? Gambling harms includes domestic abuse, rent arrears, mental health decline, relationship breakdown, and suicides, as we've spoken about, especially in young men. And if the government want to tackle, and the government does want to tackle violence against women and girls, they need to tackle gambling. Because when I asked the gambling industry why they needed some of their shops to be open 24/7, I was told because taxi drivers who are working nights can come in after a hard night's work and gamble away their wages, basically. And what used to happen is that gambling, is that people who lost their money and their wages used to get really angry, pick the chairs up and smash the machines. These machines cost about £40,000. So what did they do? They made the chairs so heavy so now you can't pick it up and smash the machines. It is absolutely shocking. Homelessness, links to gambling and homelessness, the rent money is being gambled away. I met a gambler who was thrown out of his house by his wife because he just gambled away all of their money. They couldn't even afford food. And suicide, particularly in young men. Gambling isn't like drug and alcohol where you can see it or you can smell it. It's something that can be hidden for a while until you have no money, until you're desperate. And that's why sometimes it's found really late, because it gets to that desperate point. And the Social Market Foundation notes that residents consistently associate high concentrations of gambling venues with increased antisocial behaviour, reduces feelings of safety and decline in pride in people's high street. So if we want pride in place, we do need to clear up our high streets. Gamble Aware shone a light on the scary prospect of young children being systematically groomed by the industry. Grooming young people to become desensitised to gambling, specifically through gaming. They're using the same addictive hooks to get young people addicted to these games and to gambling. It's more potent than drugs and alcohol, and also some influencers are being paid to influence young people to gambling. And the 16-year-old young boys are more vulnerable to this than any other group. And that's because there are video games like FIFA EAFC, which I've never played, just because I don't know. But there's loot boxes, and there's virtual currencies where people can use and pay. And it is something that we have to get a grip of. And it also means that we need to work with creators. And I have been working with Casper Lee, Joe Sugg, Amda Driscoll, Joshua Peters, Giuseppe Federici, on how we can involve and help and develop and mature current and future creators. And I would like for the Minister to also meet with this group of creators to see what we can do to help that industry. So action must be taken. And the Social Market Foundation statutory says that the statutory duty to aim to permit gambling premises is no longer fit for purpose. As an activity, it prevents councils from responding to evidence of harm and local opposition. It erodes the ability of local communities to shape their neighbourhoods. So this is what needs to be done. And they have 5 steps. And I'm just going to read their 5 steps, Madam Speaker, because I agree with them all. 1, greater licensing powers should be granted to local authorities, including cumulative impact assessments with no further delay. 2, public health directors should be included in the gambling licensing process as they are for alcohol. 3, current premises licence classifications should be reviewed, particularly in relation to AGCs operating under bingo licences. Bingo licences is another way how these AGCs get away with saying that they're a bingo hall where there's no live bingo played at all. It's mainly B3 machines. which make, by the way, Madam Deputy Speaker, on average is £30,000 a year. So that is money coming directly from the poor to the gambling industry. 4, the cap on annual licence fees payable by premises to local authorities should be increased. At the moment, it's just £1,000, should be increased to at least £2,000, and the amount of fees should be reviewed. 5, the balance of responsibilities between local authorities and the gambling commissions on enforcement and inspection of regulations should be clarified, because that is very opaque at the moment. And 6 is the aim to permit room. Basically, we need to get rid. And in addition to those, Madam Deputy Speaker, nice guidelines, recommendations from the healthcare professionals are saying that when people go to their GP for appointments, when they ask if they've got an alcohol or drug addiction, they should also be asked if they've got a gambling addiction. And that way we'll be able to identify the link between gambling, mental health breakdown and suicide. And gambling harm, Madam Deputy Speaker, harms all of us. For every person who's addicted to gambling, 6 or 7 people is also affected, and that's their family members, close friends, even work colleagues. So if we want safer streets, safer homes, safer minds, it will all be dramatically improved if we tackle the gambling industry, the harm of gambling, and if we aim to permit. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is as on the order paper, and if we start with an immediate 7-minute time limit, I call Siân Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you hugely to the Honourable Member for Brent East for proposing the motion. I was pleased to support the application for the debate, and we've just heard an excellent case for action and some really clear examples of the harm that gambling causes. I'm also a member of the APPG, and I thank the chair of that group, the Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, for his work. It is clear that cross-party members feel passionately that the government is ignoring clear evidence and going far too easy on this industry. The timing, the timing of this debate is very timely. Indeed, tomorrow I'll be visiting, by chance, the excellent Break Even charity in Brighton, which provides free support for Brightonians dealing with gambling-related harm, including people's partners, family members and friends. And as part of what I say today, I want to thank some of the brilliant campaigners on gambling reform and harm that I meet regularly for their work, including Matt Zog, cousin at Gamban, Gambling with Lives, who are incredible, and the many other local charities in Brighton who are working on addiction and recovery, including to gambling. This motion focuses on planning policy. We've heard some excellent further suggestions across licensing, and I absolutely fully support the proposal in the motion to remove the aim to permit provision. Councils must be able to control the spread of gambling premises in every way possible. Often, in the current times, gambling debates centre around what is clearly a growing menace of online gambling and its really excessive levels of advertising, but much of the harm still occurs in our neighbourhoods. Indeed, Gamble Aware research has shown that shop fronts on the high street are the source of a high number of views of advertising itself too. Some of my recent work focusing on this aspect has also been in proposing changes to Brighton and Hove City Council's gambling policy, and my response to its review highlighted the proliferation of high street gambling establishments in my city. As evidence given to the Health and Social Care Committee last year we know that gambling companies really concentrate their efforts in areas of greater deprivation, but coastal constituencies like mine also have a very high density of gambling facilities due to our history as seaside resorts, with, I believe, what is a harmful impact on my constituents. According to the Council, the total number of licensed gambling premises where the residents and visitors can gamble in Brighton and Hove as of May 2024 was 257. In comparison, we have 25 GP surgeries, 13 libraries, 44 dentists, around 20 youth services and 7 leisure centres. But soon we could have more gambling establishments than the city's 340 pubs. Because of this, my submission to the Council called for the introduction, at the very least, of a principle of one in, one out for gambling establishments to represent and respect our licensing objectives around preventing harm to children and to people suffering from vulnerabilities, including problem gambling and addiction. Pardon me. I also wanted to see the prohibition of advertising for gambling on billboards, bus stops and any other outdoor advertising sites within the city, including on buses, to back up this policy. Advertising bothers me in many, many ways, but on this topic it makes me really angry, and I think the government could do a lot more about that. With these physical adverts also in our neighbourhoods, alongside all the gaudy shop fronts, coupled with the ever-present marketing on social media and television and every time you tune into sport, there is no wonder that we are seeing increased gambling harms. The Gambling Commission has estimated the problem gambler rate to be close to 2.5% now. Based on the Office for National Statistics' latest population estimates, this puts well over 1 million people in Great Britain into the category of problem gamblers. The Commission also estimated a further 3.1 million are classified at risk, with many, many more harmed indirectly. This is experimental data using new survey methodologies, and it is regularly challenged by the industry, and I am not surprised by that because it is so shocking. But it is backed up with other evidence too. We know that the National Gambling Helpline is receiving more calls and online chats than ever before. The NHS has also reported significant growth in referrals for its gambling harm services. And I know that young people are at growing risk from this harm too. In 2018, the Gamble Aware charity commissioned 2 reports looking at the extent and nature and impact of gambling and marketing and advertising on children, young people and vulnerable groups in the UK. And for children, it reported that while they were not being directly targeted by advertisers, almost all children and young people are seeing gambling adverts, with only 4% of 11 to 24-year-olds participating in the survey reporting not having been exposed in the previous month. Clearly, high street premises contribute to this alongside the outdoor advertising that bothers me so much. It is clear that the government has done work to advance the 2023 White Paper proposals. I welcome the introduction of a statutory levy on gambling operators in place of the voluntary scheme. This will generate money for research, prevention and treatment. Likewise, next steps on financial vulnerability checks and enhanced risk assessments for the online services. I also welcome the withdrawal of gambling sponsorship from the front of Premier League players' shirts by the end of this season, but this does not address the significant volume of gambling adverts visible during top-flight matches. We are also ambling towards a gambling ombudsman, but they should have been up and running by the summer of 2024. As the Honourable Member for Brent East has clearly laid out, we need to see bolder action, and I think that does need to focus on the high street, as the motion rightly does. We must give local councils the powers to properly regulate the spread of gambling premises and do more too. I've encouraged my own council to perhaps get together with other councils to use the Sustainable Communities Act to actually make a proposal for action. Oh, pardon.
Unfortunately, the Honourable Lady's reached the 7 minutes. Feryal Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Happy New Year to you and to the House staff. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Brent East, for securing this incredibly important debate on the removal of the so-called aim to permit rule and to give local authorities stronger powers to protect their communities from gambling harm. The harms of gambling are evident and were very well set out by my honourable friend. An addiction, which means birthdays missed, bills unpaid, relationships broken, families torn apart, and lives quietly falling to pieces behind closed doors, while communities deal with the consequences. And at the heart of this debate, Madam Speaker, lies a simple but fundamental question. Who should decide what happens on our high streets? Local communities and their elected representatives, or gambling companies pursuing huge commercial gain? Because right now, the answer isn't local communities. As we've heard, under the Gambling Act, councils are legally required to err on the side of approval when considering applications for betting shops and 24-hour slot machines, even when where there is clear local opposition, even where where an area is already saturated, and even where harm is obvious. This is not localism. This is not prevention, and it certainly is not protection. And if councils don't follow this instruction to err on the side of approval, they face legal challenge, costly appeals, and the threat of court costs. Money that should be spent on local services, not defending the indefensible. Residents in my constituency of Enfield North have watched their high streets change. Not because of community demand, but because the law makes it almost impossible for councils to say no to new gambling premises. There are now 30 gambling premises across my constituency, 30 gambling venues designed to drain the same more deprived communities, and the law still forces councils to approve them. This is indefensible, and the government must act to end it now. Even when an area already has multiple betting shops or adult gaming centres, even when constituents object, and even when harm is well documented, councils are still legally pushed towards approval. The aim to permit rule is an outdated rule that stacks the deck in favour of gambling companies, telling councils to say yes to new gambling premises even when they have serious concerns. The result is predictable. In Enfield North, as in many other London boroughs, gambling venues cluster in our most deprived areas, not in our most affluent areas, I must add. And reports tell us that a third of adult gaming centres are in the poorest 10% of neighbourhoods. But Enfield residents don't need a report to tell them this. They see it every day on their high streets. They're often located close to bus hubs, shopping parades, and areas with high footfall from people already under financial pressure. Many operate long hours, some operate around, and many more are operating round the clock, 24/7, relentless feeding addiction. And my constituents tell me the same thing again and again. We object, but it makes no difference. The council says it's hands are tied. We object, we organise, we lose. And that's right, they're right. And the situation is wrong. Councillors across Enfield North want to protect their communities, but the law does not give them the tools. Change is needed, not to ban gambling, as my honourable member and my honourable friend, the member for Brent, said, not to close existing premises, and not to stop people placing a bet. But we must restore balance and local control. We need to remove the automatic legal bias in favour of gambling operators and allow councils like Enfield to make decisions based on evidence, community impact and local need, not a law that loads the dice against local communities. The money leaves the community, but the harm does not. It shows up as debt. It shows up as mental ill health, and it shows up as pressure on our NHS, and tragically, as we've heard, in lives lost. The government has acknowledged the problem, and of course that is incredibly welcome, but if the aim to permit rule remains, councils are being told to say yes by default. We must trust local democracy, empower councils like Enfield to act before harm escalates, and put people and communities before profit. Madam Deputy Speaker, our high street should serve the people who live around them, not exploit them. The law is broken, the balance is wrong, and the time for change is now. Thank you.
Iqbal Mohamed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. High street gambling is hollowing out our high streets and causing untold harm to hard-working families. For too long, gambling harms have been tolerated, minimised or treated as an unfortunate side effect of what is in reality an exploitative predatory industry. That approach has failed, and the consequences are visible across the country, and acutely so in my constituency of Dewsbury and Batley. Gambling-related harm extends far beyond financial loss. Every year in the United Kingdom, between 250 and 650 people take their own lives as a result of relentless, isolating grip of gambling addiction. Gambling fuels cycles of debt, secrecy and shame, driving anxiety and depression and placing unbearable strain on relationships. Children grow up in households marked by stress and instability, partners face emotional and financial ruin, and communities are left to deal with the long-term fallout. Nationwide figures show that a staggering 1.4 million Britons have a gambling problem. What makes this harm particularly troubling is its predictability. Gambling harm is not randomly distributed. It disproportionately affects those in deprived areas that are already facing economic insecurity, poor mental health and social isolation. These noxious effects are not unavoidable collateral damage, but the predictable human cost of an industry that pursues profit above all else and a regulatory system governed by weak safeguards. We must therefore be honest about how gambling companies operate. These are not passive providers of leisure, but sophisticated corporations that systematically use behavioural data, targeted marketing and psychological design to maximise profit from often vulnerable users who are routinely incentivised to continue gambling, despite clear warning signs. 86% of gross online betting profits come from just 5% of customers. Major gambling operators feed on misery while all the time dodging their wider social responsibilities. There are 440 offshore companies with UK gambling licenses and over 1,500 active sites from offshore locations. Profits taken from local high streets are routed through opaque corporate structures and offshore jurisdictions, minimising their tax contributions to the very communities that bear the cost of this harm. An ITV investigation in November 2025 found that Sky Bet had relocated its headquarters to Malta in order to avoid paying our government £55 million a year. There is a profoundly unjust settlement. This is a profoundly unjust settlement. Families are pushed into debt and despair. Public services absorb the social and mental fallout of gambling harm, and the wealth generated is quietly siphoned away. Gambling giants have perfected a cynical, extractive business model. This is not enterprise, but an egregious abuse of capitalism dressed up as entertainment. Yet the political establishment has failed to meaningfully wrestle with the harm the gambling industry has caused. Safety mechanisms. For years, lobbyists have successfully watered down efforts to rein in reckless gambling operators. Just a few months ago, the head of UK's Betting and Gaming Council made the ludicrous claim that to MPs that gambling does not cause any social ills. Previously hiding behind so-called voluntary contributions to harm prevention amounted to a fig leaf that allowed profits to soar while safety mechanisms remain pitiful. The introduction of a statutory levy last year is not a success story, but an admission of failure and a clear verdict on the bankruptcy of self-regulation. When an industry repeatedly places profit over protection, Parliament does not merely have a right to act, but a moral obligation to do so. Despite this obligation, treatment and support services remain overstretched and unevenly distributed. Access remains inconsistent, with too many falling through the cracks. According to the data from the annual Great Britain Treatment and Support Survey, almost 40% of those experiencing problem gambling in Great Britain have not accessed treatment or support in the last year. Tools such as self-exclusion schemes, affordability checks and voluntary limits are too often poorly enforced, inconsistently applied and easily circumvented. The burden is frequently placed on individuals to recognise their own harm and seek assistance. Gambling regulations, like for alcohol and tobacco, must be preventative, mandatory and robust. In particular, our communities remain constrained by the outdated aim to permit principle, which places a legal presumption on local authorities to approve new gambling premises, even when harm is evident. Our existing regulatory framework strips local authorities of the ability to prioritise public health and community well-being instead of forcing them to wade through applications and turn local democracy into a rubber stamp for gambling profits. I am proud to support my honourable friend, the member for Brent East, and other colleagues in calling for its abolition. In my own constituency of Dewsbury and Batley, these national failures to effectively regulate the gambling industry have very real consequences. According to the Gambling Commissioner's own register, Kirklees Council has granted 34 gambling licences with 10 gambling premises located in my constituency alone. That level of concentration is not accidental. It reflects a system that allows gambling operators to cluster in areas of economic vulnerability. Gambling reform is ultimately about choices, not the choices of individuals under pressure, but the choices we make as lawmakers. Do we continue to allow an industry to extract wealth from the most vulnerable with insufficient safeguards, or do we act to rebalance the system in favour of public health, fairness and community well-being? We need protection, education from school and support. For constituencies like mine, this is not a theoretical problem. It is urgent and it demands immediate action. We must strengthen regulation and hold corporations accountable and properly fund treatment.
Now, members will be able to see that there are 4 members left, and I propose to call the front benches at 25:2. So whilst I shall leave the Honourable Lady on 7 minutes, it will be a 5-minute time limit for the remaining members. Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable friend from Brent East on both her powerful speech, particularly outlining the impact on gambling addicts and their loved ones, but also I fully support the reforms being put forward by my honourable friend and congratulate her work, the work of members across this House and the work of Brent Council on leading this important campaign to address the scourge of gambling premises on our high streets. And Hounslow Council is one of a number of councils across London and beyond that have signed up to the campaign. They've done so because they are aware of the harmful impact that these premises make and the need for new powers, and because Hounslow High Street was the high street with the second greatest number of gambling premises in the country a few years ago. Hounslow Council seeks these new powers so that they can protect public health and safeguard our communities from the tide of new gambling shops opening, whether they're new bookies or 24-hour adult casinos. I've seen the changes that have hit our high streets over the past 30 years, the rise of online shopping, the outdated business rates regime, and the decline of traditional British shops that have sucked, and the life that's been sucked out of many of our high streets. Too often the gap left has been filled by bookies and casinos who naturally can afford to run premises on our high streets. In my own constituency, I've seen the problems that gambling addiction causes. Now, understandably, not many constituents are prepared to admit to us that they have been financially affected by gambling, whether their own habit or a member of their family. But those who have opened up to me have told me of the devastating consequences, family separation, subsequent debt, individuals losing £5,000 or even £10,000 because of it. The gambling often started with a vain hope that a particular debt can be paid off by a win at the local bookies or the fixed odds betting terminals. And an excellent 2023 report by Hounslow Council into gambling patterns in the borough referenced the work of the Gambling Commission in identifying those most at risk of adverse impacts from gambling, and the council then linked that data to the prevalence of local gambling establishments in our borough. The former finds that those most at risk of falling into gambling addiction are people who already have drug or alcohol dependencies and or mental health problems. Too often those two issues go together. And this in turn has a knock-on impact on our frontline services, the NHS, social care and the police. The aim to permit policy that allows the proliferation of these premises clearly is not a cost-free policy. Furthermore, these high street gambling premises are targeted to exist in the communities with the highest levels of deprivation, unemployment and homelessness. In my constituency, I counted this morning, we have over 10 bookies and gaming centres in Hounslow Town Centre, compared with around 3 in the much more affluent neighbouring Richmond Town Centre. Back in 2016, we had 44 fixed odd betting machines in Hounslow High Street. Madam Deputy Speaker, those with the least resources are being targeted most by the gambling industry. A Guardian article in 2021 found that 21% of Britain's gambling outlets are in the poorest 10% of the country, with just 2% in the most affluent areas. So I support the proposal and the amendment because I support councils having the power to shape their communities. Residents often incorrectly think that local councils can block new developments or new shops simply because they want to. But under the current laws, they can't. Too often, local councils are unfairly blamed for the rise in the number of gambling establishments. If the government truly want to put power back into communities and let local people shape their areas and give local councils proper powers, they can do that. I am sure that in response to today's debate, the gambling industry will have prepared its defence. That's their right in a pluralistic society. But we should remember the ferocity with which the industry reacted when it was proposed to clamp down on fixed odd betting terminals, the crack cocaine of gambling. Whenever sensible reforms are proposed, we see the gambling industry fall back on the same tired old cliches. So finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Labour government's pride of place powers aim to give local people more control over their high streets and local areas. But let's go further, faster, and give local authorities and local people more powers to take back control by reviewing and ultimately removing the aim to permit rule from the Gambling Act. Thank you.
Ben Coleman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for Brent East for securing this important debate, and this is a subject which on the Health and Social Care Committee we've looked at in some detail. And it is clear to both from what I've heard from witnesses, from talking to the National Gambling Clinic, which is in my constituency, Chelsea and Fulham, and just walking around our local high streets and talking to people who I know and local people, that high streets remain at the heart of the gambling harm being caused in our country, in our localities, particularly in our most disadvantaged and our poorest communities. And as we've heard, when the Gambling Act in 2005 abolished the so-called demand test and replaced it with an aim to permit, in other words, remove the requirement to prove local need before opening a betting shop, it opened the door to this Wild West clustering of betting shops in poorer areas. And this does devastating damage to individuals and to families and communities, because residents in streets where every third or fourth shop can be a gambling den face constant, a gambling den with cups of tea, can face constant exposure to gambling during routine activities. They could be shopping for groceries, they can be taking kids to school, they can be commuting for work, and there is a gambling premises. And it becomes normalised. Gambling becomes normalised. It's like a regular part of daily life, rather than an activity which, as we know, requires caution. And for those who are vulnerable to addiction, this makes, Madam Deputy Speaker, avoidance nearly impossible. It makes relapse inevitable. And the financial consequences can be catastrophic. So lower income families, people who earn far less or live on benefits, have no buffers to absorb this sort of loss. What might be manageable for someone with savings becomes absolutely ruinous if you're living paycheck to paycheck. So what are we talking about? We're talking about people missing they can't pay their rent, their bills are going unpaid, children are going without. And the toll on mental health is huge. It is immense. You get depression, anxiety, shame, isolation. And as we've heard, you can't necessarily see a problem gambler. You may be able to see a problem drunk, but you can't see a problem gambler, and they hide their addictions from loved ones. And this is one of the points made very strongly to me when I visited the National Gambling Clinic in Earls Court. Because while the stress that they're already under is being compounded, the stress that by the gambling, and this is already, and the stress that they're under, mental health stresses, may already be more prevalent in depressed areas, deprived areas where the housing is less adequate, where there are other stresses and other challenges they're facing on a daily basis. We've heard about the redoubtable charity Gambling with Lives, and I would like to pay credit to them. There is no doubt in my mind that the gambling industry and the gambling lobbyists are often, in their behaviour, simply thugs. Yeah. And to have people like the wonderful Richies who set up Gambling with Lives after having lost their son, and who brought a constituent to see me who talked about his own son having lost his life to gambling, ploughing away and fighting the fight that they do, I think has been very inspirational for all of those in this House who've met them. And they made me aware, and they made the Health and Social Care Committee aware, that there are between 117 and 496 gambling-related suicides every year. And having taken evidence, we thought this was a strong enough piece of data, although it's wide, to place into our report. So it's on the public record. Because gambling doesn't just tear families apart, it takes lives away as well, and we must remember that. And of course, we have to look at the community impact of the clustering of betting shops allowed since the law change in 2005. And the clustering drives out family businesses, it drives out community services, it feeds neighbourhood decline. And when councils try to do something about it, as Hammersmith and Council, which covers the Fulham part of my constituency, try to do it, and we've got a high concentration of betting shops, especially in deprived neighbourhoods, and the North End Road in Fulham, they've identified it as a gambling vulnerability zone. And there are 2 council estates nearby which are right at the bottom decile for deprivation and employment and income. And it's not coincidence, because higher deprivation and clustering of gambling premises go together. And North End Road, one of the heart of Fulham, is one of the 3 hotspots in the borough. So the council's trying to do its best to act responsibly with the national framework. It's consulting on a local plan. Residents are keen for it to do it, but they're still... And the most vulnerable areas, there'll be a presumption to refuse, but they cannot, in the end, refuse premises unless because the law still constrains them, and it's out of kilter with alcohol licensing, other licensing. So we would like to see, the Health and Social Care Committee, we called for not just, we welcomed the fact that government had reframed this as a public health crisis, but we called for local authorities to have a key role in gambling licensing, and for directors of public health to be made a responsible authority when it comes to gambling planning and licensing applications. We need to see the reform of legislation governing high street gambling, and we need to see it now.
Order. Joe Powell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join others in congratulating my honourable friend for securing this debate and for her campaign. Our high streets have struggled in recent years, and as others have said, that is harming our communities. My constituents tell me that one of the most pernicious trends has been the rise of adult gaming centres and other gambling establishments. In the past year alone, in my constituency, there have been applications for 4 new or expanded adult gaming centres in my constituency, and some of them have then come back for further applications. And each time they've been met with widespread opposition from a large and diverse range of local people. It's brought together community campaigners with resident associations, charities, other businesses, local schools, and great national charities, as others have referenced. And we know that the trend is towards an increase of adult gaming centres, up 7% nationally between 22 and 24, and as others have said, that the most vulnerable people in society are at the most risk from the harms they generate. And across Kensington and Bayswater, I've been campaigning with residents to halt the tide, but it is relentless and it is whack-a-mole. In Earl's Court, we successfully fought off an application from Silvertime to convert a former high street bank into a 24/7 gambling premises, but we know, having withdrawn the application, they will likely come back again. Also in Earl's Court, we managed to persuade the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to deny another operator, Admiral, an extended 24/7 licence. And I had hoped that this would set a precedent, that these planning and licensing applications would no longer be nodded through. But sadly, we suffered a major defeat just before Christmas, with RBKC approving a new casino in Notting Hill, again taking over a high street banking premises, despite over 1,500 residents signing my petition to reject, and the visit of my honourable friend from Brent East. Now, the residents and I are not giving up, and we will continue to use every procedural step we have to fight this unwanted development and persuade RBKC to say no, or at least to scale it back. But our tools are limited. So I do want to thank her for her campaign and for showing me, as I mentioned earlier, firsthand the risks of the slot machine industry. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is symbolic of what's happened to our high streets in the past decade or two. The decline of services and businesses that our community depend on to be replaced by 24/7 gambling premises and dodgy shops pushing vapes, low-grade souvenirs, knock-off products, often not paying their fair share or employing people legally, meaning legitimate businesses are not operating on a level playing field. So we need solutions, and I'm glad that the government have committed to reform. I strongly welcome the proposals as part of the Pride in Place programme to give more powers to local authorities to assess cumulative impact of these premises. And I'm glad the government have recognised that high streets cannot thrive with rows of adult gaming centres offering slot machines 24/7, and that data-driven decisions on gambling licences should help to restrict new premises opening. But it's vital these measures give real weight to community voices, like my constituents, who have had enough, and I also hope we'll see them soon in this House so we can actually get those assessments up and running. I also welcome the measures on dodgy shops on our high streets, as I mentioned. I really welcome the Chancellor's commitment to increasing enforcement, giving trading standards a boost, tackling fake company directors, and lots of other elements of high street tax dodging and tax evasion that are linked in some way to the decline that people see. But beyond these hugely welcome measures, I hope we will see continued ambition to go further, including looking at whether the 2005 Gambling Act is still fit for purpose and whether its provisions are helping or hindering local communities coming together for the benefit of their high streets in the exact spirit of the Pride in Place programme. Madam Deputy Speaker, our high streets can be so much better, and there's no one simple solution, but the part of any solution must be to halt the gambling takeover.
Phil Brickell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Brent East for securing this debate and for her work campaigning on this issue over the years, including this week's letter to the Prime Minister with nearly 300 signatories, which she coordinated. My honourable friend was quite right to say that our high streets are being hollowed out by a surge of betting shops, with local people left seemingly powerless. And it seems to me this is an issue which should sit squarely with this Labour government's Pride in Place programme. Now, I'm not suggesting we should have no betting shops. I recognise that the industry does provide jobs and tax revenue. But just locally where I am, there are 3 betting shops within walking distance of my office in Horwich, a town of fewer than 20,000 people, and there are 2 more nearby in West Horton town centre. The current situation is not conducive to fulfilling the government's manifesto pledge, which I proudly stood on in 2024, to tackle gambling harm, which is a lived reality, sadly, for far too many families in Bolton and Greater Manchester as a whole. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend giving way. A couple of points on the high street. So the way these shops are set up with the attractive front fascias, front lighting, it's quite appealing to especially children and young people. But would you also agree with me that that should be managed and there should be regulation around that? But also, like cigarettes, alcohol, there should be a health warning on the outside of the shop that would then make sure that people are aware what this place is and what harms it can cause.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his contribution. He makes a valid point, and it's one we see time and time again all too often on high streets in my constituency in the same context around vape shops as well. So he does make a very valid contribution. As an aside, we all know that gambling today is no longer confined to the once-a-week trip to the bookies. It's on people's phones, it's in their pockets, available 24 hours a day, and online slots are amongst the highest risk products. Fast, repetitive, and designed to encourage long sessions and binge play. So I would like to commend the government on the introduction of stake limits for online slots. These limits matter because harm increasingly happens not just on the high street, but also on our phones, anywhere and at any time. But back to the high street. As we've already heard many times in this debate so far, the clustering of betting shops remains a serious and unresolved problem, particularly in deprived communities. Now, I did receive assurances from the then Minister with responsibility for gambling last year that cumulative impact assessments on gambling licensing will be introduced to strengthen councils' abilities to influence the density of gambling outlets. But this measure is pending parliamentary time. that much-dreaded phrase. Can I urge the Minister not to let this important measure get crowded out? It's a new year. And with New Year come New Year's resolutions. How about a resolution to prioritise addressing what is far too liberal a regime for managing those gambling harms? And we know that where gambling outlets cluster, harm increases from debt and mental ill health to family breakdown and homelessness. According to the government's gambling-related harms evidence review, the North West has some of the highest rates of at-risk gambling in England, with around 4.4% of adults experiencing elevated risk. And even more worrying is that the North West has one of the highest proportions of people harmed by someone else's gambling. Partners, children, parents and friends, all paying the price. Again, I do welcome the government's steps that have already been taken. The introduction of the statutory gambling levy to raise around £100 million a year for research, prevention and treatment is the least I think the industry could do, frankly. But while acknowledging the issue is always the first step, as a former councillor himself, I know the Minister will recognise it's no good leaving councils powerless to tackle the physical concentration of gambling premises on our high streets. So if we're serious about reducing gambling harm, we must accelerate reform. Our high streets should offer opportunity, not addiction, and our laws should protect people, not profits.
Which brings us to the front benches. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Ian Sollom.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank myself, the Honourable Member for Brent East, for securing this debate and for all her hard work on this issue. It is impressive what she's been doing. Now, gambling can be a light-hearted pastime that many would describe as fun and harmless. And of course, as a Liberal Democrat, I support an individual's right to choose. But as we've heard, for some people, gambling really does come at a very high cost, and some of those stories the Honourable Member shared were very, very moving. And this isn't just for those that are directly affected by the gambling, but it's also their friends, their families, all those that have that emotional burden and shared financial burden in some cases. If I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to delve into a few of the statistics. Some have been mentioned, but I think they are worth sort of emphasising. According to last July's gambling survey for Great Britain, an estimated 2.5% of adults have struggled with problem gambling, and that does equate to over 1 million people. And the proportion with severe problem gambling was 9 times higher for those using in-person slot machines and 6 times higher for those using online slots. More than 1 in 40 who gambled in the last year experienced severe harm to their life, such as turning to crime to finance gambling, experiencing a relationship breakdown, or losing their home. And Public Health England estimates that there are tragically more than 400 gambling-related suicides a year. Gambling affects all ages and genders, but it is amongst men and young people that the rates are particularly high. More than 1 in 20 of those aged 18 to 34 who had gambled in the last 12 months reported a severe impact on their life. Now, the Liberal Democrats have long been calling for gambling reform, and we're pleased that the government has listened to us in one key area. We campaigned for many years for the remote gaming duty to be doubled, and the government has done exactly that. That's the right decision. But on the high street, as we are talking about that in this debate, much more action is needed. Madam Deputy Speaker, Liberal Democrats do support removing the aim to permit principle, that statutory presumption under the 2005 Act, and giving local authorities the same power to refuse applications for gambling venues as they have over pubs and other licensed premises. It would enable local authorities to introduce cumulative impact policies to prevent that clustering and saturation of gambling premises in areas deemed more vulnerable to harm. And it's also important that local public health bodies can make statutory representations and that public health evidence is given full weight in those licensing decisions. Additionally, we believe that more decisive action is needed to combat the harms caused by problem gambling. With that in mind, we've been calling for restricting gambling advertising to tackle the gambling adverts that bombard people through their TVs and radios, as well as marketing via social media, establishing a gaming ombudsman with real power to protect consumers and resolve complaints, enforcing and implementing affordability checks by mandating financial checks and data sharing to stop gambling beyond means, and taking tough action against black market gambling. It's also vital that there's an access to a range of support services. It should be the case that anyone worried about their gambling or anyone close to them can easily seek help in their local area and ensure that gambling firms pay their fair share towards these services. And linked to that concern, alongside leading support charities, is that the introduction of the statutory levy on gambling firms doesn't see gambling support services disrupted during the transition period this year. So we are calling on the government to ensure that there is interim funding available so that vulnerable people don't fall through the cracks in that transition. Although most people who regularly gamble do so without a problem, it is evident for some that it is a slippery slope that leads to a host of financial, personal and health problems. We have a duty to prevent that from happening in the first place and to help those already struggling. So I urge the government to act as a matter of urgency to tackle the very real and evident harm gambling can cause to families, children, young people and communities across the country. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for allocating time for this important debate, and also to the Honourable Member for Brent East for bringing it forward. Before I turn to some of the specifics of the case she's making, I would just remind the House that, of course, for the vast majority of people who do gamble, they do so responsibly and safely and without risk of harm. Indeed, some of our annual events in this country are associated with gambling and form part of our national identity. I'm thinking in particular of the Grand National. Indeed, I think the first time I ever placed a bet was on a horse called Party Politics. It probably led to an interest in something different to gambling, but that's another matter. The government's own figures show that problem gambling affects around 0.4% of adults, a figure that has remained broadly stable for many years. Meanwhile, 22 million people gamble every month without harm. Of course, gambling harms exist, and as part of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, I sat through oral evidence on this in April of last year. And we have heard some of the most powerful testimony from the Honourable Member about real lives that have been harmed because of gambling. Problem gambling can ruin relationships, destroy mental and physical health, and in the worst cases, end lives. The number of gambling-related deaths is far outnumbered by alcohol-specific deaths or alcohol-related deaths, but any life lost, any life destroyed is a tragedy. We must do more to support people with gambling addictions and crack down on illegal gambling and law breaking. However, policy must be based on evidence. Betting shops are among the most heavily regulated retail premises. They have strict age verification requirements, limits on gaming machines, trained staff, formal self-exclusion schemes. Those protections only apply when people gamble in licensed premises. They do not exist in the same way at home and not at all on the black market. We should not assume that further reducing the number of high street betting shops will reduce problem gambling. When it comes to high street betting shops, research by the ESA Retail Group found that 89% of betting shop customers combine their visit with trips to other local businesses, thereby supporting the high street. Betting shops support around 46,000 jobs, contributing nearly £1 billion a year in direct tax to the Treasury and a further £60 million in business rates to local councils. We have heard how betting shops have spread uncontrollably in some areas, but nationally betting shops are closing. Since 2019, the number of licensed betting shops has fallen by 30%, from more than 8,000 to fewer than 6,000. Thousands of jobs have already been lost as a result, and many more are now at risk following the tax raises announced in the budget. I will give way.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. He talks about the amount of money raised in tax from gambling companies. Can he also give us the figures for the amount of money that the NHS has to spend each year on the mental health and other problems that arise out of gambling addiction?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. He himself, I think, agrees that this is not a case of stopping people gambling. And the point I'm making about high street premises is that they represent some of the more safer environments for gambling, and some of the more risky forms of gambling are far less visible than the high street shops we're hearing about today. And I'm certainly not minimising in any way the effects of problem gambling and some of those involved in the industry, particularly on the black market. Now, while the budget did not directly target betting shops, many operators run integrated online and retail businesses. As online gambling duty has doubled and sports betting duty rises by nearly 70%, the UK will have one of the highest tax gambling rates in the world. Now, I pay tribute to the Honourable Member in talking about local empowerment, and I think the key point she is making, the heart of her argument, is empowering local communities, local councils, to be able to exercise greater control on high street premises. And I also want to raise another specific issue that shows how confused the system has become related to the argument she makes. Recently, Chesterfield Borough Council allowed an adult gaming centre to introduce betting facilities without a formal change of planning use, on the basis that betting was considered ancillary. This shows that the council was able to effectively bypass planning laws and create confusion and inconsistency in how planning and gambling laws are applied. It's deeply worrying. Betting shops and adult gaming centres are fundamentally different types of premises. They're regulated differently and treated separately in planning law for good reason. Allowing betting facilities to be introduced into adult gaming centres without proper scrutiny risks creating a backdoor route for betting operations to open without local consent or oversight. We support the sentiment behind the arguments that the Honourable Lady is making, that local communities and local councils should be better empowered to make decisions for their high streets and their communities. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to finish by asking the Minister 4 questions. Firstly, will the Government act to close the planning loophole that allows adult gaming centres to introduce betting facilities without a proper change of use? Second, what assessment has been made of the impact of recent tax rises on high street betting shops, including closures, job losses and empty units, and what assessment, if there is one, will be published? Third, what concrete action is being taken to tackle illegal gambling, particularly operators that target people who have self-excluded from licensed betting shops? And finally, the Government wrote to the Health and Social Care Committee on the 12th of June of last year and said it would look to complement local authorities' existing powers in relation to the licensing of gambling premises. Does the Minister have an update?
Minister Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I firstly congratulate the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate to go forward, and indeed my honourable friend for Brent East for securing it. And can I start by saying that many honourable members across the Chamber have talked about the harms of gambling, and while I think that's incredibly important as an underpinning of this debate, I'm going to concentrate on the motion itself in terms of the licences and the premises themselves, and what local authorities can do to deal with those kinds of issues. And can I pay a huge tribute to my honourable friend from Brent East, because I think the way she presented her speech and telling the real life stories was really powerful. And can I also join her in paying tribute to Jackie Olden and her campaign on behalf of her mother Wendy, a hugely powerful story she told about the impact of gambling on their family and the campaign that they've subsequently been proceeding with, and Charles and Liz Ritchie, who, after the death of their 24-year-old son, Jack, started gambling with lives. The Minister for Gambling, Baroness Twycross from the other place, met with both Jackie and Liz in the autumn of this year, and they will take forward some of those discussions as a government. There is also next Thursday in Westminster Hall a gambling harms debate, and I would encourage members to bring some of their contributions that they've given today to that debate in Westminster Hall next week. Now, my honourable friend from Brent East mentioned a list of things that she would like to see coming forward, and I hope to cover some of those in my contributions. But can I just start by mentioning a few of the contributions? My honourable friend from Hales Owen, who had an intervention, talked about the 80-20 rule. We've paused changes that were proposed in the Gambling White Paper to the 80-20 rule because the Gambling Minister recognises the problems and wants to assess that protections from harms are much more robust before any thoughts to changing that rule comes forward. So I hope that satisfies members who are concerned about the 80-20 rule. The member for Brighton Pavilion talked about the break-even charity in her constituency that she's visiting, I believe, tomorrow. And she talked about the 2023 White Paper. In terms of the 2023 White Paper, we want to implement the recommendations that were in that. Obviously, it's a previous government's initiative, but the recommendations were pretty powerful. And we want not only those to be implemented as quickly as possible, which we're trying to get through as quickly as possible, but we also want to see them bedded in before the demands for another review of gambling. And she also talked about the Gambling Ombudsman. That also requires primary legislation, and of course we'll bring forward those kinds of issues as and when we are able to do so. My honourable friend for Enfield North talked about the 30 gambling premises across her own constituency and the cumulative impact of those on that, and I hope I'll be able to come to some of those issues about cumulative impacts as part of my contribution. The honourable gentleman from Dewsbury and Batley rightly talked about the gambling harms. Please do come to the debate next Thursday if he's able to do so, and bring some of those real life and examples that he gave. My honourable friend from Brentford and Isleworth has her high streets has one of the highest concentrations of gambling establishments in the country, and she demonstrates why more powers like the cumulative impact assessments that I'll talk about will come hopefully to help this kinds of issue in the future. My honourable friend for Chelsea and Fulham told us rightly that problem gamblers are invisible, whereas other addictions are not, and that highlights the problem that has to be dealt with in the issues of the Health and Social Care Committee. And I commend him and his committee for what they have done to bring this into the public health domain. My honourable friend for Kensington and Bayswater highlighted some successes that communities have had in terms of limiting the gambling premises in his own constituency, but is frustrated at both the ability to be able to do that and indeed the ones that have been able to be approved. My honourable friend for Bolton West talked about our manifesto commitment to tackling gambling harms and indeed the stake limits, the statutory levy to fund research, protection and treatment, and I hope that the cumulative impact assessments that we'll talk about shortly are able to help with those kinds of issues. Generally, the government is fully committed to giving communities across the country stronger tools to shape their local areas, and that's what this debate has been about. We have passed the Landmark Planning and Infrastructure Act, which will deliver growth in housing and strengthen local planning to the implementation of spatial development strategies nationwide, and of course that's backed up with a £5 billion Pride in Place funding to neighbourhoods. We're also widening and deepening local devolution through the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, and delivering a suite of tools to support communities in improving their high streets. Those include the high street rental auctions, which will give councils the power to auction the lease of long-term vacant premises, a community right to buy for communities to take ownership of local buildings that they value, and streamlining the compulsory purchase process to help local authorities regenerate our high streets. As many honourable members will be aware, we also intend to provide additional powers to local communities on the location and density of land-based gambling premises, and today I will focus on the government's approach to that land-based gambling and the powers that local authorities have and will be given in relation to gambling premises. All of us want to see a responsible gambling industry which brings social and economic value to communities across the country. My own mum, Madam Deputy Speaker, worked in a bookmaker's herself. In particular, we're clear about the value of the land-based gambling sector. It was certainly valuable to her when she worked in there. It makes an important contribution to national life, and we've heard things like the Grand National. I know the importance of seaside arcades and bingo halls to communities across the country and the joy that they bring to many millions of people, and the reforms to gambling duties announced in the autumn budget mentioned by the Shadow Minister, including the abolition of bingo duty, reflect the contributions of these venues to our economy and to our local communities. In parallel to that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government recognises that the harmful gambling can wreck lives of individuals. We know that. We know that families and communities can be wrecked as part of this. And that is why we're working with the land-based sector, the Gambling Commission and others to ensure that player protection measures are effective and that people can gamble safely while seeking effective help when that is needed. Local authorities are essential to efforts to mitigate this risk, and let me run through what they can do. They play a crucial role in the regulation of gambling up and down the country. Local authorities have a wide range of powers, a suite of powers and tools in relation to gambling premises. Licences are subject to guidance issued by the Gambling Commission and its licensing objectives. Licensing authorities are given broad power to set conditions that require licensed gambling to be carried out in a way that is consistent with keeping gambling fair and open. And during the licensing process, licensing authorities can attach conditions to premises licence which operators must adhere to. All local authorities also should publish a statement of principles on gambling licensing, outlining local issues, priorities and risks. In these statements, licensing authorities can identify high-risk areas and specify local risks. Operators must take steps to mitigate those risks in their applications. I fully acknowledge and understand what honourable members say on the aim to permit, but we do not believe that the premises licence application process is a foregone conclusion. The aim to permit principle is subject to strict conditions, including the licence application is consistent with the local authority's gambling policy statement. And it's really worth saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the aim to permit is a licensing issue and not a planning issue. Once a licence is granted, licensing authorities have extensive powers of monitoring and enforcement, and I would encourage them to use them. And planning permission is always required to create or change of use to a gambling premises, such as a bingo hall or a betting shop, and they have to be used. Let me go on with the limited time that I have, Madam Deputy Speaker, to cumulative impact assessment, because I think this is the heart of it. I don't know if I have time to give way, but I'll give way then. Madam
Rossendale.
I thank the Minister very briefly. Does he accept, though, that freedom of responsibility when it comes to gambling is exactly where we should be, rather than restricting people from taking part in activities like greyhound racing in my constituency, Romford Greyhound Stadium? It's part of our local culture, and it's very important that we don't allow places like that to close down because of severe restrictions from government.
Yeah, I appreciate the intervention, but that's got a completely different story to what this debate is about. Nobody's denying that greyhound racing, that the Grand National, that other betting, and that many tens of millions of people do every week is safe and secure. But regulating industries like gambling is something this government has to do, something that governments have always done. And the regulations are in place to keep people safe, but make sure that people who do enjoy gambling can be assured that the system that they are using is indeed safe. Let me talk very briefly about cumulative impact assessments. This is something the Prime Minister has committed directly to at Prime Minister's questions. It's a question from my honourable friend from Brent East. The Government wants local authorities to feel empowered to make data-driven decisions that are in their community's best interest. We want them to feel able to curate healthy and vibrant spaces that reflect the needs of their local communities. And as part of our Pride in Place strategy to strengthen local authority influence over the location and density of outlets, we have confirmed that we will introduce cumulative impact assessments when parliamentary time allows. Cumulative impact assessments will empower local authorities to take data-driven decisions on premises licences, particularly in areas identified as vulnerable to gambling harms, and we've heard a lot about where those gambling harms would be. It's really important that aim to permit also applies to licensing applications. Planning policies, including the local plans, offer councils additional tools to influence the number of gambling premises in those areas. So if we have the local plans, the aim to permit, the cumulative impact assessments, and the ability to enforce and set strict conditions, that should give a suite of powers to local authorities to prevent, if they so wish, to make their high streets the way in which they want them to be. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, this government wants to ensure that local authorities have the tools and resources that they need to shape their local areas in line with communities' best interests. It's a government commitment, it's a Prime Ministerial commitment from this dispatch box. Our plans to introduce cumulative impact assessments is an important part of that commitment, and we'll bring that forward as soon as the legislative vehicle is available.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank all the members who contributed in this debate. To the Shadow Minister, I'd say spend just 10 minutes with Catherine Morgan, the Secretariat of the APPG. She will talk you through how formal exclusions don't work, or the families who have been affected by gambling, because a lot of the information that the Shadow Minister talked about basically doesn't hold water. Brighton and Pavilion talked about one in, one out. Exactly, we're not trying to stop gambling, we're just saying that the clustering needs to stop. My honourable friend from Enfield North talked about how her constituents want a say, and this is what we're talking about, Madam Deputy Speaker, having a say on the high street. The member for Dewsbury and Batley talked about the offshore jurisdictions and the tax avoidance. We didn't even get into the tax avoidance, but this government has done more than any other government in this area, and this government should be credited for that. The honourable friend for Brentford and Isleworth talked about protecting public health and how these gambling shops are sucking the life out of our high streets, and residents do think that local authorities have the power to stop them, and they really don't. My honourable friend from Chelsea and Fulham talked about the wild west of clustering of the betting shops and the normalisation of gambling. And the thing is, we're normalising things that cause harm, and that there's no buffers to manage this loss, which I think is really vital. My honourable friend from Kensington and Bayswater, the trend is up, as you say, than it was just a decade ago. And 1,500 signatures for any petition from any MP is quite incredible. And the thing is, you still can't make the decisions that the council wants to make. And my honourable friend from Bolton West talked about gambling on phones and online slots and clustering. And Madam Deputy Speaker, ultimately, this is about how we protect people locally and how we make sure that the gambling industry, they're not going to lose any money if they don't open another couple of shops or two. So we don't have to worry about that. We need to worry about individuals and people and keeping them safe.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.